They took my patience first, then they took my silence for weakness. Then my own son stood in my dining room and told me to stop wasting his inheritance on myself. I set my fork down. I didn't say a word. And the next morning, before the bank even opened, I moved every account he thought was already his. Nobody saw it coming. Not my son, not his wife's family, nodding along like they'd waited years to say it out loud. Not even Lorraine. And Lorraine sees everything. By the time Marcus figured out what I'd done, his own lawyer had gone pale reading it back to him. And somewhere in a safe in my office, an envelope my husband sealed 4 years ago was still waiting. I hadn't opened it yet. I didn't need to. Not yet. Let me take you back 6 weeks. Stop wasting my inheritance on yourself, Mom. It's not yours to burn, Marcus said. He leaned back in the good chair like he already owned the house. Across the table, his father-in-law Gerald nodded, like Marcus had finally said the quiet part out loud. I set my fork down, without a single sound. My name is Vivian Tate. I am 61 years old. I did not raise my voice. I did not need to. There was a pot roast going cold between us. My daughter-in-law Renee wouldn't look at me. Gerald Whitcomb reached for his wine like he'd earned a toast. Marcus just sat there, 34 years old, waiting for me to argue so he could act wounded about that too. I didn't argue. I stood up. I started clearing plates. Vivian. Gerald said my name like he was doing me a favor by using it at all. I only mean a woman your age, alone in a house that size. It's a lot to manage. Marcus worries. Marcus worries about the house, I said, not about me. Nobody laughed. Nobody was supposed to. Let me tell you who I actually am. Marcus forgot somewhere along the way. Gerald never bothered to learn. I grew up 2 blocks from the house I live in now. Bellefontaine, Ohio. A small town in Logan County. Most people driving through never slow down for it. My mother cleaned houses on the west side of town for 30 years. My father worked the foundry until his knees gave out. I went to Mount Olive Baptist every Sunday of my childhood. I still do. Third pew from the front. Same seat my mother sat in. I was good with numbers before I knew that was a thing you could be good at. I balanced my mother's grocery budget at 11 years old because she was tired and I wasn't. By 19, I was keeping books for 2 small businesses on the side, finishing community college at the same time. By 26, I had my own bookkeeping clients and a folding table in my kitchen that served as an office. Then I married Walter Tate. Walter drove a truck for a janitorial supply company. He had a habit of fixing things nobody asked him to fix. A business owner would complain their cleaning crew never showed up right. Walter would say quietly, "I know someone who could do that better." He meant me. He always meant me. We started Tate Building Services with one van. Walter drove it. I did the books, the bidding, the invoicing, the collections. Some nights I sat at that same folding table until 2 in the morning, while Marcus slept down the hall. By the time Marcus was in middle school, we had 4 vans. By the time he graduated high school, we had a fleet, 40 employees, and contracts with half the commercial buildings in 3 counties. Walter used to say, "The house stays in the name that earns it." I didn't understand what he meant by that for years. I thought he was just talking about pride. We built Tate Building Services into something worth just over $6 million. All told, the company, the equipment, the commercial contracts, the house on North Detroit Street we paid off free and clear 11 years ago. Walter died 4 years ago. Heart sudden, a Tuesday morning, no warning at all. I buried him on a Saturday in October. I went back to running the company on Monday because 40 families were depending on paychecks, and grief doesn't cut checks. I never remarried. I never wanted to. I had the company. I had Mount Olive. I had my grandchildren when Marcus let me see them. And I had one habit nobody ever managed to break me of. Every morning, 7 days a week, I go through the ledger. Not because I don't trust Lorraine Tibbs. She's kept our books for 19 years, and she'd sooner set herself on fire than let a number sit wrong. I go through it because Walter taught me something. The person who stops watching the numbers is the person the numbers eventually catch by surprise. I promised myself a long time ago that would never be me. The Monday after that dinner, I was in the office by 7. Same as always. A vendor rep came by with an invoice for cleaning supplies. 41 boxes. The total came out $4.12 higher than what we'd agreed on in March. I caught it before he sat down. Didn't need a calculator. Told him exactly where the discrepancy was, down to the line item. A case of degreaser that had quietly gone up in price, and nobody told us. He looked at me the way people sometimes still do. Like he'd expected someone else to be doing this job. A younger man, maybe. A white man in a suit, maybe. Not a 61-year-old black woman in a cardigan, behind a desk in a low brick building on the edge of a small Ohio town, correcting his math before he'd even taken his coat off. I don't get loud, I told him, with a small smile. I've said this line more times than I can count. I get accurate. He fixed the invoice. I signed it. Life went on. But something Gerald said at that dinner table kept sitting with me, like a splinter under skin you can't quite see. Not the part about my age, the part where he said Marcus worried about managing a house that size alone. Because Marcus had never once, in 4 years, asked me how I was managing the company alone. He'd asked, more than once, when the company would officially be his. There's one more thing that matters here. An envelope in the safe in my office. Walter left it for me, sealed, the week before he died. My name on the front, in his handwriting. Nothing else. I never opened it. I told myself I wasn't ready. Truth was, as long as it stayed sealed, some part of Walter was still deciding something, still working something out for me. I liked knowing that was still happening, somewhere, even after he was gone. I didn't know yet how soon I'd need what was inside it. That Tuesday, I drove to First Merchants on Main Street, reviewing the company's quarterly statements with our branch manager, a habit Walter and I started 20 years ago and I never broke. I sat across from a young loan officer named Priya Anand. She'd only been at the branch 6 months. She pulled up the operating account, the payroll account, and the 2 commercial lines of credit tied to Tate Building Services. "There's a draw here I want to flag," she said. 22,000 from the equipment line, 3 weeks ago. I hadn't authorized any draw from that line in 3 weeks. Who initiated it? I asked. She turned the screen toward me. The authorization code belonged to Marcus. I sat very still for a moment, the way I do when I need my face to stay calm while my mind works. Marcus had signing authority on 2 accounts, a courtesy Walter and I extended him at 30, mostly so he could handle small vendor payments when I traveled. $22,000 was not a small vendor payment, and Marcus did not work for Tate Building Services. Never had. He managed a restaurant in Columbus, one he owned outright, as far as I knew, with money from his wife's family. "I'll need copies of that authorization," I told Priya, "and anything else on those 2 accounts going back 6 months." She said she'd have Lorraine pull it that afternoon. I thanked her. I drove back to the office. I did not call Marcus. I did not text him. I made a pot of coffee, sat down at my desk, got out a legal pad. Because 32 years of building something from a single van had taught me one thing. You don't confront a number until you understand exactly what it's hiding. Lorraine Tibbs had been keeping our books since Marcus was 15 years old. 51, sharp-eyed, reading glasses on a beaded chain her granddaughter made her. She did not believe in surprises. Sit down, she said, when I walked into her office Wednesday morning with the bank printouts. You've got that face. What face? The face you had the year the county tried to reassess us into bankruptcy. The calm one. The one that scares me more than yelling would. I put the printouts on her desk. She read them without a word for a long minute. Her mouth got tighter with every line. 22,000 from the equipment line, she said. And here's another one. 8,000 from payroll reserve 4 weeks before that. Both authorized under Marcus's code. He's never touched payroll reserve in his life. He has now. Lorraine took her glasses off, rubbed the bridge of her nose. Vivian, I need to ask you something. And I need you to actually hear the question. Does Marcus think this company is already his? I thought about the dinner table, Gerald Whitcomb's wine glass, that careful, generous tone men like Gerald use right before they say something they've clearly practiced. I thought about $30,000 quietly leaving accounts my husband and I built with our own hands, one van and one folding table at a time, while my son sat in a house his wife's family paid for and told me I was the one wasting money. I think, I said, he thinks it's his enough to spend. Lorraine didn't say anything else that morning. She just started pulling every statement on both accounts back 6 months. Did it the way she did everything, without drama, one document at a time, building a stack instead of a scene. Let me explain something about Gerald Whitcomb. He matters more to this story than he should. Gerald made his money 3 generations back. Coal land in West Virginia that turned into timber money that turned into a chain of regional insurance offices. His grandfather started it. His father expanded it. By the time Gerald was born, the family had stopped talking about how the money was made. They talked instead about how it should be kept. Renee grew up in a house with a circular driveway in Upper Arlington, an expensive suburb of Columbus. When she brought Marcus home the first time, Gerald was polite to him. The specific, careful way people are polite to something they've already decided is temporary. Marcus told me once, laughing about it like it was nothing, that Gerald had asked him at Thanksgiving what his mother did for a living. Marcus said, "She runs a cleaning company." Gerald said, "How enterprising." The tone made the word sound like an insult dressed up as a compliment. Marcus laughed, telling me that story. I didn't laugh. I remembered it. Over the years, I watched my son slowly absorb something from that house on the circular driveway. A low hum of shame about where his own family's money actually came from. Not the amount of it. $6 million is $6 million in any driveway. The method of it. A black woman's hands in rubber gloves, 40 years of floor wax and invoice ledgers and pre-dawn drives to job sites. Standing behind every dollar Gerald Whitcomb's family had never had to earn with their bodies. Marcus started calling it old family money at dinner parties, like it had descended from some ancestor instead of being built by 2 people he could call on the phone. I didn't say anything about it for years, told myself it was pride talking, that he was young, that he'd grow out of it. I kept paying attention to the company, the ledger, the church, my grandchildren. I let my son's discomfort about his own mother sit quietly in the corner of every family gathering, the way you let a stain sit on a tablecloth you plan to wash later. Thursday, I met with our attorney, a woman named Carol Delgado. She'd handled Tate Building Services contracts and filings for 15 years, ever since Walter and I outgrew the lawyer who helped us incorporate. Her office was in a converted house 2 streets over from the courthouse, plants on every windowsill, a framed photo of her own mother behind the desk. "I want to understand exactly what shape the trust is in," I told her. "Not what I remember, what it actually says." Carol pulled the file. "Walter restructured this 5 years ago," she said. "You were both listed as co-grantors originally in the early paperwork. But the current instrument, the one filed in 2021, lists you as sole grantor, fully revocable. You can amend it, restate it, or dissolve it entirely at will, without anyone else's signature. Does Marcus know that? Marcus, Carol said carefully, has always operated like he's a beneficiary of something fixed. He's never once asked me what kind of trust it actually is. People rarely ask questions they're afraid of the answer to. I sat with that for a moment. Sole grantor, fully revocable. The house stays in the name that earns it. There's something else, Carol said, sliding a second folder across the desk. Not related to the trust. A colleague of mine in Columbus handles small business financing disputes. She mentioned a name that made me think of you, Marcus Tate. He's listed as a pledged asset guarantor on a private bridge loan, $90,000, taken out 4 months ago against future inheritance proceeds from the Tate estate. I felt something go very cold and very still in my chest. He pledged an inheritance that doesn't exist yet, I said, against a loan. He pledged shares in a company he doesn't own, Carol said. There's a difference, and it's not a small one. If those shares were never legally his to pledge, and the lender finds out before he pays it back, that loan converts from a bad bet into something closer to fraud, depending on how the paperwork was represented. I asked her how she knew the restaurant needed $90,000 in the first place. Because, Carol said, the restaurant's behind on rent in 2 locations. Word travels in small legal circles faster than people think. He's not just spending your money, Vivian. He's drowning. And he's using your name as the life raft. I drove home that afternoon, past the corner shop on Main Street where I buy my coffee most mornings. The one where a new clerk, maybe 20 years old, still sometimes asks if I'm there about a cleaning job before she recognizes my face. I didn't correct her that day either. I never do. Just paid for my coffee. Drove the rest of the way home in silence, thinking about my son, standing in a house that Gerald Whitcomb's family built out of coal and timber and insurance premiums, quietly ashamed of the exact kind of hands that had actually paid for his childhood. Renee called me that evening. She rarely called without Marcus prompting her. Marcus wanted me to check on you, she said, after Sunday. He feels bad, does he? He just worries you're spreading yourself thin, at your age, managing everything alone. I thanked her for calling. I didn't tell her about the $22,000, or the $8,000, or the $90,000 bridge loan sitting on shares that were never legally her husband's to pledge. I said goodnight. I went to bed. I lay there thinking about an envelope in a safe, my name on it, in handwriting I hadn't seen in 4 years. I still wasn't ready to open it, but I was starting to understand the day was coming faster than I wanted it to. Let me go back to that Tuesday at First Merchants for a moment. There's a piece of it I skipped. It matters more than it seemed to at the time. After Priya showed me the flagged draw, I sat in the bank's small side office longer than I needed to, not because I didn't understand what I'd seen. I needed a minute. Half of Main Street knew me as Vivian Tate, the woman who ran the cleaning company. None of them knew yet what I'd just learned about my own son. Priya asked if I was all right. I'm fine, I told her. I've just learned something about my family. I need to sit with it before I decide what to do. Take your time, she said. I've got nowhere to be. I appreciated that about her. A young woman, not yet 30, 6 months at that branch, and already she'd learned something most people take years to learn. The difference between doing your job by the letter and doing it with actual care for the person sitting across from you. It reminded me of myself at 26, keeping books for 2 small businesses out of a folding table. learning slowly that competence and kindness were never two separate skills. They were the same skill, just aimed in two directions at once. I drove home a slower route than usual, past Mount Olive, past the elementary school where Marcus once brought home a report card, a note from his teacher calling him a bright boy with real leadership potential, past the pharmacy that used to be our first office. I thought about all the versions of Marcus that existed before this one. The one sitting in a leased house in Columbus, telling his mother she was wasting his inheritance. The boy who fell asleep in the van. The boy with the report card. The young man who used to call me every Sunday, without fail, just to talk. Before Renee's family started hosting dinners that always seemed to land on the same night. I didn't blame Renee for that. Renee never once, in 4 years, said an unkind word to me directly. It was Gerald. Always Gerald. The slow gravitational pull of a family with a circular driveway and 3 generations of oil portraits. A family that never had to learn the difference between money you build and money you're simply handed. I had to learn that difference. So did Walter. So had our whole community, generation after generation, because nobody was ever going to hand it to us first. That evening, before Renee's call, I sat on my back porch with a cup of tea, watched the sun go down over a town that had never been fashionable, never featured in a magazine, never drawn anyone off the highway for a reason beyond gas and a sandwich. I thought about how much of my own dignity had been built in rooms exactly like that. Small, unglamorous, unwitnessed by anyone who mattered to the wider world, and how completely that dignity did not need Gerald Whitcomb's permission to be real. My mother used to say something to me when I was young, cleaning alongside her some Saturdays before I understood why we needed the extra money. She'd say, "Baby, they can make you clean the floor. They can't make you feel small while you're doing it." I didn't understand it then. I understood it completely, sitting on that porch, thinking about a son who'd let a rich man's family teach him to feel small, small about a floor his own mother scrubbed clean with her own 2 hands, so he'd never have to. I finished my tea, went inside, called Lorraine. Not about the numbers this time, just to hear a voice that had known me longer than almost anyone still living. "You holding up?" Lorraine asked. "I'm thinking about my mother," I said. "That's usually a good sign," Lorraine said. "She'd be proud of what you built, Vivian. All of it. Every van. Every contract. Every dollar." "I know," I said. "I think I've always known. I think Marcus is the one who forgot." "Then help him remember," Lorraine said. "Or don't. Either way, don't you dare shrink yourself down, trying to fit into whatever size Gerald Whitcomb thinks a woman like you is supposed to be." I told her I wouldn't. I meant it. I went to bed that night thinking less about ledgers, more about a porch, a cup of tea, and a mother's voice from 40 years back, still finding its way into exactly the rooms where I needed it most. Friday morning, Lorraine found the third draw. 4100, she said, sliding the printout across her desk. Marked only MT, auth pending, no invoice attached, no vendor name. Sitting in a suspense account, waiting on paperwork nobody's filed. Pending what? That's the question. Lorraine took her glasses off again. That was how I knew she'd been thinking about this longer than she wanted to admit. "Vivian, I've kept these books 19 years. I've never seen an auth pending entry from Marcus that didn't turn into something bigger." I called Carol that afternoon, asked her to find out, quietly, exactly what shares Marcus had pledged, and to whom. It took her 3 days. When she called back, her voice had the flat, careful tone of someone delivering news she wished she didn't have to. "He pledged 40% notional interest in Tate Building Services," Carol said, "to a private lender out of Columbus, a man named Russ Halloran. He specializes in bridge loans against expected inheritance, usually to people who are, quoting the paperwork here, imminently likely to receive controlling family assets. Marcus represented himself in writing as the presumptive successor owner of the company. He's never owned one share of that company. No, Carol said, he hasn't. Which means everything he pledged was never his to pledge. Halloran's paperwork calls that collateral fraud, not colorfully, literally. There's a clause in the loan documents about material misrepresentation of collateral ownership. If Halloran calls the loan and finds out the collateral never existed, Marcus isn't just in debt anymore. He's exposed. I sat with the phone against my ear, looking out my office window at the parking lot where Walter used to park the first van, back when there was only one. "How close is the lender to calling it?" I asked. "My colleague says weeks, maybe less." I thanked Carol and hung up, sat alone in my office until the light outside went orange, thinking about my son, sinking in debt. Debt he'd taken out on the strength of a mother he was ashamed to admit had built everything he'd tried to borrow against. That night, I went into the safe. I don't know why that particular night. Maybe it was the $4,100 marked pending for a debt Marcus hadn't even told his own wife about. Maybe I was just tired of being patient in a way that had started to feel less like grace and more like permission. I sat on the floor of my office, the little steel door open, Walter's envelope in my lap, my name in his handwriting on the front, 4 years of dust along the top edge where I'd never once let myself touch it. I opened it. Inside was the original trust instrument, the one from 2021, the one Carol had already described to me over her desk. But seeing Walter's own initials on every page hit different than hearing about it secondhand. Sole grantor, Vivian Ann Tate. Fully revocable at grantor's sole discretion. No co-signature required. Not from Marcus. Not from anyone. Ever. And under the trust papers, a single handwritten page, folded twice. "Vivian," it read. "If you're reading this, I'm gone, and something's gone sideways enough that you finally needed to open it. I built this so nobody, not even our own son, could ever tell you what was yours. You earned every dollar of this twice over. Once with your hands, once with your patience. I never wanted a piece of paper to forget that, just because I wasn't there to say it out loud. The house stays in the name that earns it. That name was always yours. I love you. Take care of our boy, but don't you dare let him take care of you out of a house you paid for yourself. Walter." I sat on that floor a long time. I didn't cry the way people expect. I just held the page. Let it be true. "Saturday," Marcus called, which he almost never did without Renee prompting him. "Mom," he said, "Gerald and I were talking. He thinks it'd make sense for me to start sitting in on some of the company's financial decisions, learning the ropes before, before anything happens to you. Before anything happens to me." I repeated. "You know what I mean? You're not getting younger. I just think it'd be smart for me to understand the accounts better. In case." "In case what, Marcus?" There was a pause on the line, the kind a person takes when they're deciding how much of the truth to tell. "In case I need to step in," he said finally. I asked him, as plainly as I could manage, whether the restaurant was struggling. "It's fine," he said, "too fast. It's a slow season. Every restaurant has a slow season." "Marcus, is it fine?" "Gerald's helped some," he said. "It's temporary." I didn't tell him about Russ Halloran, or the $90,000, or the 40% notional interest he'd pledged in a company that never once had his name on a single filing. I told him I'd think about what he'd said. I told him I loved him. I hung up the phone, sat with the particular ache of loving someone who is drowning, lying to you about the water at the same time. Sunday, I went to Mount Olive, third pew, Same seat my mother sat in for 40 years. Pastor Jennings preached on the parable of the talents, the servant who buried what he'd been given instead of putting it to work, afraid of the master, afraid of losing what wasn't fully his to begin with. I sat there and thought about a son who'd spent his whole adult life ashamed of the hands that built the thing he wanted to inherit. I thought about a father in law who never once had to build anything with his own two hands. I thought about how easy it is to confuse inherited comfort for earned worth when nobody around you ever corrects it out loud. After service, an older woman from the choir, Miss Odessa, squeezed my hand in the parking lot, the way she'd done since I was a girl. "You've got that look, Vivian," she said, "like your mother used to get, right before she fired somebody's whole cleaning crew and hired better ones the same afternoon." "I might be getting that look," I admitted. "Good," Miss Odessa said. "Somebody around here needs to remember whose name is actually on things." I drove home that Sunday afternoon, called Carol first thing Monday morning. "I want to restate the trust," I told her. "Fully. New instrument. Irrevocable this time. Filed clean. New trustee structure. Nothing left open to interpretation. And I want every operating account, every line of credit, every asset tied to Tate Building Services moved into it before the end of the week." "Vivian," Carol said, "you understand that once you do this, Marcus's signing authority disappears entirely. Today, not gradually. I understand. And you understand what happens to that bridge loan once the collateral he pledged legally ceases to exist under his name." "I understand that too." There was a pause on Carol's end. The particular pause of a lawyer double-checking her client knows exactly what she's about to do. "Then let's get started," she said. I hung up the phone, sat for a moment, my hand flat on Walter's letter, still on my desk where I'd left it since Friday night. I wasn't angry anymore. Anger would have made this easier in some ways, and harder in every way that mattered. I was simply, finally, done holding something up that had never belonged to the person leaning on it. I have to back up one more day before I move forward. There's a detail from that same week I skipped. It changes how you should understand what came after. The morning after I opened Walter's letter, I drove to the office earlier than usual, before Lorraine had even unlocked the front door. I sat in my car in the empty parking lot a while, the same lot where our first van used to sit, repaved twice since then, a small fleet of company trucks now, instead of one borrowed vehicle. I thought about the day Walter and I signed the paperwork to incorporate, sitting across from a lawyer neither of us fully trusted, a white man in a suit. He kept addressing his questions to Walter, even when I was the one holding the folder with all our records in it. Walter, without missing a beat, turned to me every time. "Ask my wife. She keeps the books." He did it 4 times that meeting, patient, unbothered, until the lawyer finally started addressing his questions to me directly. I hadn't thought about that meeting in years. Sitting in that parking lot with Walter's letter in my handbag, I understood it differently than I had at the time. Walter hadn't just been standing up for me in that room. He'd been quietly teaching a room full of people, one redirection at a time, exactly whose name belonged on things. Lorraine arrived not long after, found me still sitting in my car. "You've been up all night," she said. Not a question. I opened the envelope, I told her. She didn't ask what was in it right away, just came around and got in the passenger seat, the way she'd done countless times over 19 years, when something needed saying slowly instead of quickly. "It was the trust," I said finally. "Sole grantor, fully revocable. And a letter." What did the letter say? I told her the parts that mattered. The house stays in the name that earns it. That name was always yours. Lorraine sat quietly a moment before she spoke. Walter always did see further down the road than most people gave him credit for, she said. Quiet man. Never made a show of being smart. Just was. I think he saw this coming, I said. Not the specifics, not Marcus or Gerald or Russ Halloran, but he saw that someday somebody might try to tell me the company wasn't fully mine to decide about, and he made sure that argument could never win. Then let's make sure it doesn't, Lorraine said. She got out of the car, unlocked the office. We got to work the way we always did, one document at a time. Grief and vindication, I was learning, could sit in the same front seat of a car, neither one needing to leave first. That was the day I finally called Carol, told her to draft the irrevocable restatement. Everything that followed, the retitling, the Saturday meeting, the 3 zeros on Marcus's phone screen, traced back to that quiet morning in an empty parking lot. A woman and her bookkeeper, sitting in a car before the sun had fully cleared the tree line, deciding together that a fact 32 years in the making was finally ready to stand up in daylight. Carol Delgado moved fast once I said the word. By Tuesday, she'd drafted a new instrument, a fully irrevocable trust, corporate trustee attached, First Merchants Trust Division, which meant no single person, not me, not Marcus, not anyone, could unilaterally undo it once it was signed and funded. I asked her why I'd want to give up my own flexibility along with his. Because irrevocable is the only structure that ends the argument permanently, she said. Revocable means it's still a conversation. Irrevocable means it's a fact. I signed the new trust documents Wednesday morning at her office, plants on every windowsill, her mother's photo watching from the desk. Lorraine came with me, sat in the waiting room the whole time. When I came out, she just nodded once, the way she does when a number finally lands where it's supposed to. Wednesday afternoon, Priya walked me through the mechanics. Every operating account, every line of credit, every commercial contract receivable tied to Tate Building Services, retitled into the new trust by Friday close of business. Marcus's signing authority, the courtesy Walter and I extended him at 30, terminated the moment the retitling posted. He'll get a notice, Priya said. Standard language, nothing dramatic. Just access removed. Contact the trustee with questions. Good, I said. Let it be boring. Boring is what I want. The days between signing that trust and what happened after were quieter than you'd expect. Quiet was exactly the point. I still went to the office every morning at 7. Still caught the vendor invoices before the reps had their coats off. Still drove past the corner shop where the young clerk occasionally asked if I was there about a cleaning job. Still just paid for my coffee and let it go. Some corrections aren't worth the breath. Some are. A woman learns the difference over 61 years, or she never learns it at all. Thursday evening, Renee called with an invitation. Marcus wants to have a family meeting, she said, at Dad's office in Columbus. Saturday. He wants to talk about, and I'm quoting him here, getting the succession plan formalized. Does he? I said. Dad thinks it would be good for everyone. Get things settled while you're, still healthy and able to make these decisions clearly. I noted the phrase, still healthy and able to make these decisions clearly, as though a woman who'd never once missed a discrepancy in 19 years of ledgers might suddenly be too addled to know her own signature. Tell them I'll be there, I said. Friday, Lorraine and I sat together, going over the final funding schedule one more time. Every account, every contract, every dollar of the $6 million, moving quietly into a trust with my name on it and nobody else's. You nervous? Lorraine asked. No, I said, and meant it. Walter used to say the house stays in the name that earns it. I've spent 30 years earning it. I'm not nervous about a fact. What about Marcus? I thought about that for a long moment. I love my son, I said. I've loved him since he was 6 pounds 9 ounces, screaming in a hospital in Bellefontaine, Ohio. I'll love him Saturday, whether he understands what's happening to him or not. But loving him was never the same thing as letting him spend money that was never his. To impress a family that spent 4 years calling what I built enterprising, in a tone that means something else entirely. Lorraine reached over, squeezed my hand once, hard, the way she'd done at Walter's funeral. Then let Saturday be Saturday, she said. Before I tell you about that Saturday, I need to back up a little further. There's a piece of this I skipped. It matters. The week after I opened Walter's envelope, before Carol had finished drafting the new trust, I drove out to see my grandchildren. Marcus and Renee have two. A boy named Elijah, 9. A girl named Camille, just turned 6. Renee has never once made it difficult for me to see them, which is more than I can say for some of the rest of that family. Camille was at the kitchen table doing homework, a worksheet on money, coins glued to construction paper. She looked up at me with Walter's exact eyes. Same shape, same steadiness. Grandma, Grandpa Gerald says our house is old money. What's old money? I sat down across from her. It means somebody a long time ago earned it, I said, and everybody since then has just been keeping it. Is our money old money? Our money, I told her, is new money. Your grandfather Walter and I made every dollar of it ourselves, starting with one van. New money is better, baby. New money remembers exactly where it came from. Camille thought about that, with the seriousness only a 6-year-old can manage. Then went back to gluing pennies onto construction paper. I sat there a moment longer than I needed to. Something about the exchange had settled something in me. All the bank statements in the world hadn't. Elijah found me on the back porch a few minutes later. He's 9. Quiet, watchful, in a way that reminds me of Walter more than it reminds me of Marcus. Dad's been weird, he said, not looking at me, working at a loose thread on his sleeve. He's on the phone a lot. Grandpa Gerald keeps coming over and they go in the office and shut the door. Weird how? Like when he's in trouble, Elijah said. Like when he broke Mr. Castellano's fence with the truck and didn't want to tell anybody. I told my grandson that grown-ups sometimes have problems they don't know how to fix yet. That it wasn't his job to fix them. That whatever happened, he and his sister would always have a grandmother 2 blocks from where she grew up, and she wasn't going anywhere. He nodded like he half believed me. Which is about all you can ask of a 9-year-old with good instincts. I drove home that evening thinking less about ledgers, more about a boy who already knew without being told a single number that something in his father's life had come untethered. The following week, Lorraine and I spent 3 full days doing what she called walking the whole dog. Not just the 3 flagged draws, every transaction on every account Marcus had ever had signing authority over. Going back 5 years, cross-checked line by line against invoices, vendor contracts, payroll registers. Most of it was clean. That mattered to me more than I expected. For 5 years, Marcus had used that signing authority exactly the way it was intended. Small vendor payments, the occasional reimbursement, nothing that should have worried anyone, which meant whatever changed, changed recently, changed fast, for a specific reason. Here, Lorraine said, on the second day, tapping a line on the screen. March, a wire out, 11,000. Memo field says Halloran Capital Partners, LLC, processing fee. I hadn't heard the name Russ Halloran yet, not directly. Carol would bring it to me within the week, but Halloran Capital Partners, LLC, sitting in our own payroll reserve account, disguised as a processing fee, told me everything about the shape of what was coming. Before I had a single fact to hang it on, he used our own account to pay the fee on a loan against our own company. I said, mostly to myself. Looks that way, Lorraine said. That's not spending money he thinks is his, I said. That's using our money to borrow against our money. Lorraine took her glasses off. The tell I'd come to recognize over 19 years. The one that meant she was choosing her next words carefully. I've watched you build this thing since Marcus was in braces, she said. I've watched you catch a misplaced penny in a stack of statements a foot thick. I need you to catch this one too, Vivian. All the way. Not halfway, because he's your son. I'm not planning on stopping halfway, I told her. That Thursday, Renee called to invite me to Elijah's school assembly, a small ceremony where the fourth graders read essays about someone in their family they admired. I almost didn't go. I went anyway. Some things matter more than the ledger, even in a week like that one. Elijah stood up in the school gymnasium in front of 40 sets of parents and read 3 paragraphs about his grandmother, about a woman who started a company with one van and a folding table, about how she still goes to work every single day, even though, in his words, she doesn't have to anymore, she just wants to. He didn't mention Gerald Whitcomb's family, or their circular driveway, or 3 generations of oil portraits. He mentioned a folding table. I sat in a metal chair in that gymnasium in Bellefontaine, Ohio, and cried exactly the amount a grandmother is allowed to cry at an event like that. Quietly, only a little. I looked over once and caught Renee watching me, an expression I couldn't quite name, something between guilt and gratitude. Afterward, in the parking lot, Renee touched my arm. He wrote that on his own, she said. Nobody told him to say any of that. I believe you, I said. Vivian. She hesitated. I know something's wrong. With the money. Marcus won't tell me the whole thing, but I know it's bad. I need you to know I never asked him to treat you the way he has. That's not something I taught either of my children. I looked at my daughter-in-law, standing in a school parking lot in the fading light. A woman who grew up in a house with a circular driveway, who had still, somehow, raised a son who wrote an essay about a folding table. I know it's not, I told her. You've never been the problem, Renee. She didn't ask what I meant by that. I think by then she already knew exactly who I meant instead. Carol called me on a Monday. News that changed the shape of everything I thought I understood about how bad this had gotten. I need to tell you something about Russ Halloran, she said. My colleague dug further into the loan file. This isn't his first pledged inheritance loan. He's made a specialty of it over the last 6 years, lending against expected estates to people who present themselves as presumptive heirs. Most of his borrowers pay it back once probate settles. A few don't. What happens to the ones who don't? He refers them to a debt collection attorney named Preston Alt, specializes in what's called equitable lien actions. Essentially, trying to attach a claim to the underlying asset once it transfers. Arguing the lender relied in good faith on the borrower's representation, it's aggressive, not always successful, but expensive to fight, even when you win. I sat with the phone against my ear, looking out at the parking lot again, the spot where the first van used to sit. So, if Marcus can't pay back the $90,000, I said slowly, Halloran's attorney could try to put a claim against Tate Building Services itself, even though Marcus never owned a share of it. He could try, Carol said. It would very likely fail, especially once the trust is irrevocable, clearly documented sole grantor from inception. But very likely fail still means months of legal exposure, discovery, depositions, your name and the company's name dragged through a courthouse. Because your son represented something as his that never was. How much time before Halloran calls the loan? My colleague estimates 3 to 4 weeks, based on the missed interest payment in April. I thanked Carol and hung up. For the first time since this started, I let myself feel something closer to fear than anger. Not fear for the money, fear for what it would mean for Elijah and Camille, growing up watching their father's name attached to a courthouse filing, watching the company their grandfather built out of one van dragged through depositions because their father had borrowed against a lie. That was the night I finally called Marcus directly. No waiting for Renee to relay a message. No letting a Sunday dinner do the talking for me. I know about Russ Halloran, I said, the moment he picked up. The silence on the other end lasted long enough that I could hear a television somewhere behind him. Muted. Some sports broadcast running without sound. "Mom," he said finally, "let me explain. I'm listening." The restaurant needed a bridge, just until the Whitcomb family's next distribution came through. Gerald's accountant said doing it against the estate was the smartest way because it wouldn't touch our savings. And I figured, eventually the company was going to be mine anyway, right? I wasn't stealing anything. I was borrowing against my own future. Marcus, you don't own a single share of Tate Building Services. Not now. Not eventually. Unless I decide to give it to you. Which is not the same thing as it already being yours. That's not fair, he said. His voice cracked slightly on the word fair, the way a much younger boy's voice used to crack right before he cried. Dad always said the company would go to me. You know he said that. Your father said the house stays in the name that earns it, I told him. He never once said your name was already on it. There's a difference. I think some part of you has always known the difference and chosen not to look at it too closely. He didn't say anything to that. Did Gerald tell you to represent yourself as the presumptive owner on those loan documents? I asked. The pause told me most of what I needed to know before he answered. He said it was standard practice, Marcus said quietly. Everybody in his family does it. Borrows against expected trusts. It's normal for people like them. You are not people like them, Marcus, I said, as gently as I could manage while still saying something true. You are my son. Your money has an origin story you can point to. Theirs doesn't. And they've spent your entire marriage making you feel small for having one. He hung up not long after. Not angry exactly, more like a man who'd run out of air in the middle of a sentence. I sat holding the phone a while, thinking about a boy who used to fall asleep in the back of a company van on Saturday roads. His mother couldn't afford a babysitter and wouldn't miss a job either. How far away that boy had traveled from the man on the other end of that phone call. The next 2 weeks were quiet. The specific heavy way weather goes quiet before it turns. Lorraine and I finished walking the whole dog. 5 years of transactions, every draw accounted for, every misuse documented with dates and amounts. $31,100 total, pulled from company accounts without proper authorization over 4 months. On top of the $90,000 bridge loan, pledged against shares that never existed. Carol finalized the irrevocable trust language, the corporate trustee, the sole grantor clause, restated in plain, bulletproof terms. Priya prepared the retitling paperwork for every account, every line of credit, every commercial contract receivable. I told no one outside that small circle what was coming. Not Renee, not Elijah or Camille, who didn't need to carry any of it. Not Miss Odessa at church, though she watched me across the parking lot most Sundays like she already knew. I did one more thing in those 2 weeks I hadn't planned on. I drove to the cemetery where Walter is buried, a small plot behind a Methodist church on the edge of town. Walter always liked the shade of the oak tree there more than he cared about the denomination. I sat on the grass beside his headstone a while, the way I do maybe 4 or 5 times a year. I told him, out loud, alone, exactly what his son had done, and exactly what I was about to do about it. You'd tell me to be gentle, I said. You were always gentler than me about him. But you also built a clause that only I could ever undo. I think some part of you already knew there'd come a day I'd need to use it. The wind moved through the oak leaves. The only answer a cemetery ever gives anybody. I sat there a while longer before I drove home. Saturday, the succession meeting, was still 10 days out. I had time enough left to be sure of every number before I walked into that room. There's one more thread I have to pull before Saturday. It changes how you should understand everything that happened in that conference room. I didn't have the full shape of it myself until 3 days before the meeting. Wednesday morning, Priya called me at the office, her voice careful, in a way I'd learned to notice. "I need you to see something before we finalize the retitling paperwork," she said. "It's not about Marcus's draws. It's about an inquiry the bank received last week." I drove to the branch that afternoon. Priya pulled up a compliance flag on her screen. A formal request for account verification, filed by Halloran Capital Partners, LLC, asking First Merchants to confirm whether Tate Building Services' controlling ownership was in the process of transferring to a named successor, specifically Marcus Tate. "He's already trying to verify the collateral," I said. "It looks that way," Priya said, "which tells me the lender is getting nervous about the missed interest payment, doing his own due diligence before deciding whether to call the loan or extend it." "What did the bank tell him?" "Nothing yet. We're required to notify the account holder before responding to a third-party ownership inquiry." "That's you. Officially, as of today, you have the right to respond, decline to respond, or instruct us exactly what to disclose." I sat with that a moment, watching Priya's careful, patient face, a young woman, maybe 30, who'd pulled the very first flagged draw that started all of this. She'd treated every step since with a seriousness I hadn't expected from someone 6 months into a branch job. "Tell him nothing," I said. "Officially, we'll answer it in person, on our own timeline, not his." That night, Carol called with one more piece I hadn't accounted for. "I spoke with opposing counsel informally," she said. "Halloran's attorney, Preston Alt. He confirmed the loan matures in 11 days. If it's not paid or extended by then, Halloran can call it immediately. Move to enforce against the pledged collateral. 11 days. Which puts the maturity date," Carol said, 4 days after Saturday's meeting. I understood then exactly what Gerald Whitcomb's timing meant. The succession meeting wasn't about my age, or my ability to make clear decisions, or any of the gentle language Renee had relayed to me over the phone. It was a deadline, dressed up as a family conversation. Gerald needed Marcus to control the company in some documented, defensible way before that loan matured, so that when Halloran came calling, there'd be an actual asset behind the collateral Marcus had pledged. If Marcus walked out with some formal title, some board seat, some piece of paper making him look like a controlling party, it might be enough to keep the whole thing from collapsing into fraud. They weren't trying to help me manage my age. They were trying to manufacture in one Saturday afternoon, 4 months after the fact, the exact thing Marcus had lied about having all along. I called Lorraine that night, told her what Carol had found. "That's not a family meeting," Lorraine said. "That's a rescue operation. And they're using you as the rope." "I know," I said. "You still going Saturday?" "More than ever," I said. "Let them try to build their rescue on a foundation I've already moved." Thursday, I drove out to see my grandchildren one more time before the weekend. Whatever happened Saturday, I wanted one more ordinary afternoon with them first. Camille had moved on from coins to dollar bills in her money unit at school, carefully counting out a stack of play money into piles of 5 and 10. "Grandma," she said, "if I had $100, could I give it to somebody and it would still be mine?" I thought about that question longer than a 6-year-old's homework probably deserved. "No, baby," I said. "Once you give it away, it's theirs. That's what giving means. But you can lend it. Lending means it's still yours. They just get to use it for a while, and they have to give it back. What if they don't give it back? Then you go to somebody who can make them, I said. A judge, or a lawyer, or your grandmother, if she's the one who lent it. Camille considered this with her usual seriousness, went back to her stacks of play money. I sat there thinking about how much of what I understood about my own son had just been explained, more plainly than any lawyer had managed, by a 6-year-old sorting fake dollar bills at a kitchen table. Elijah found me on the porch again that evening. "Is Dad going to be okay?" he asked, not looking at me, same as before. "I don't know yet," I told him honestly. I have never believed in lying to a child smart enough to know he's being lied to. But I know you're going to be okay. And your sister, and your mother. Whatever happens to your father's mistakes, they're his mistakes, not yours. I will never let them cost you anything, not one day of your life. He nodded, the same half-believing nod as before. I drove home in the dark thinking about how strange it is to be simultaneously preparing to take everything back from your own son and preparing to protect his children from the consequences of exactly that. There's a scene from that same week I haven't told you about yet. I've been circling it. It's the one that hurt the most. More than the draws, more than the bridge loan, more even than Gerald's careful, generous voice at my own dinner table. Tuesday, I stopped by Marcus and Renee's house, dropping off a casserole dish Renee had left at Elijah's assembly. An ordinary errand, nothing more. Marcus answered the door alone, Renee out with the kids. For a moment, standing on his porch with a glass dish in my hands, I saw something in his face. Something that reminded me of the boy who used to fall asleep in the back of the company van. "Can I come in a minute?" I asked. He let me in. The house was quiet, expensively quiet, the kind of quiet that costs money. We sat at his kitchen island, not the dining table where the Sunday dinner had happened, a smaller, gentler space. "I talked to Gerald's accountant," Marcus said, before I'd said anything at all. "He thinks I should countersue if you go through with the trust changes. Says you can't just cut a presumptive heir out without cause." "I'm not cutting anyone out, Marcus. I'm making clear what was always true. You were never a legal owner of anything. There's no cutting out a thing that was never given. That's not how Gerald explains it." "Gerald," I said, "has spent 4 years explaining a lot of things to you. Things that happened to keep his own family's finances afloat. Did you know his real estate holdings are carrying more debt than they were 5 years ago? Did you know his insurance agency lost 2 major contracts last year?" Marcus's face changed. Slowly. The particular slowness of a man hearing something that rearranges everything he thought he understood about his own life. "That's not true," he said. But it came out more like a question than a statement. "You can check the public filings yourself," I said. "I'm not telling you this to hurt you. Some part of you has spent 4 years feeling small next to a family whose money you assumed was more solid than mine. The truth is closer to the opposite. My money has 40 years of receipts behind it. I could show you every invoice from the very first van. Can Gerald show you the same for his grandfather's coal leases?" Marcus didn't answer that. He looked down at his hands on the kitchen island. Hands that had never once, as far as I knew, held a mop, a wrench, or a stack of invoices past midnight. "I used to fall asleep in the van," he said quietly, almost to himself. "On the Saturday routes, you and Dad would be loading equipment and I'd sleep in the back seat." "I remember," I said. "When did I stop being proud of that?" he asked. His voice cracked on it. The same crack I'd heard on the phone weeks before. "When did I start being embarrassed instead?" I didn't have an answer that would have been kind and honest at the same time, so I gave him the honest one. I think it happened slowly, I said. One dinner at a time. One comment about old family money at a time. One moment where nobody corrected Gerald when he called what your father and I built enterprising, like it was a cute hobby instead of 32 years of our lives. You didn't wake up one day and decide to be ashamed of me, Marcus. Somebody taught you to be, a little at a time, and you let them. It was easier than defending a mother who was never in the room to defend herself. He put his head in his hands for a moment. I sat there and let him. Some things a mother has to let a grown man feel without rushing to fix it for him. I'm still going Saturday, I told him gently. Whatever you decide to feel about it, the accounts are already moved. The trust is already filed. Nothing that happens in that conference room changes what's already true. But I wanted you to hear this part from me first, quietly, here, instead of finding it out in front of your father-in-law. Marcus nodded, not agreeing exactly, just absorbing. Is there anything I can do? He asked, to fix this before Saturday? You can start, I said, by telling Russ Halloran's people the truth before they find it themselves. That's not something I can do for you. That's yours to carry now. I left the casserole dish on his counter and drove home. I cried a little in the car, in the parking lot of the pharmacy that used to be our first office. Loving your child and finally letting the truth land on him at the same time is one of the loneliest kinds of love there is. Wednesday, Renee called, her voice tight. Marcus told me about the accountant and the countersuit talk, she said. I told him no. I told him if he tries to sue his own mother over money that was never his, he can explain that to our children himself. Because I won't. Thank you, I said, meaning it more than she probably knew. I also told my father, Renee added, quieter now, that I'd heard about the refinancing. The Short North properties. He wasn't happy, I knew. How did he take it? Like a man who's used to being the only person in the room who understands the numbers, Renee said. I don't think he's used to being wrong about that. I thanked her again. We hung up. I sat with a small, unexpected warmth in my chest, the first one in weeks. Somewhere in all of this, without my ever asking her to, my daughter-in-law had chosen a side, and it wasn't the side with the circular driveway. I should tell you about the version of that week I didn't share with Carol or Lorraine, the one that happened mostly in my own head. Driving between the office and the bank and the church and my grandchildren's house. A woman doesn't build something for 32 years without also building a habit of arguing with herself about whether she's doing the right thing. There were moments I almost called it off, not the trust restructuring itself. That part felt as settled to me as gravity. What I almost called off was Saturday. Some nights I thought about simply moving the accounts quietly, letting the retitling happen without ceremony, without ever making Marcus sit in a room and watch it land in front of Gerald Whitcomb. I could have mailed him a letter. I could have had Carol send formal notice. I didn't need an audience for a fact to be true, but I kept coming back to something Lorraine said the day we found the first straw. You've got that face, she'd said. The one that scares me more than yelling would. I understood, somewhere in the middle of one of those long nights, that quiet had never once been the same thing as invisible. I had spent 32 years being quiet, while men in rooms exactly like Gerald's assumed that quiet meant absent, meant powerless, meant a woman who could be managed the way you'd manage an aging asset, instead of a person who built the asset in the first place. If I let this happen only on paper, in private, Gerald would never have to sit with what he'd actually done. He would go on telling himself, and probably telling other people at other dinner tables that he'd simply tried to help modernize an aging family business before an elderly woman lost her grip on it. He would never have to watch, with his own eyes, the exact moment his son-in-law's phone screen turned up 3 zeros. Never have to feel, even for 30 seconds, the particular vertigo of it. Realizing the resource he'd been quietly counting on had never belonged to anyone but the woman he'd spent 4 years calling enterprising in that careful, condescending tone. I decided, somewhere around the ninth night of turning it over, that Gerald Whitcomb had earned exactly that 30 seconds. Not out of cruelty, out of accuracy. The same accuracy I'd been practicing my whole life, correcting a misposted invoice down to the penny. Because a fact left uncorrected doesn't just sit there quietly, it grows teeth. Eventually, it bites somebody who deserved to see it coming. One afternoon that same week, I made a stop I hadn't planned. I drove past Tate Building Services' original location, a small strip of pavement behind a hardware store that Walter and I rented for $80 a month back in 1994. Back then, the whole operation was one van, one contract with a dentist's office on Main Street, a folding table in my kitchen that served as headquarters. The building's gone now, torn down for a pharmacy years ago, but the pavement is still there, cracked and patched. I sat in my car in that parking lot for 10 minutes, remembering a version of myself who did the books by lamplight. Back then, we couldn't afford to run the electric bill up any higher than it needed to be. That woman never once, not for a single day, thought of herself as lucky to have what she had. She thought of herself as owed exactly what she'd earned. No more, no less. And she intended to collect every bit of it before she was finished. I drove home from that empty parking lot, called Lorraine, mostly just to hear a voice that had been in the trenches with me the whole way. "You thinking about backing out?" Lorraine asked. She always could read my silences better than most people read my words. "No," I said. "I was thinking about the folding table." "Good," Lorraine said. "Keep thinking about the folding table. It'll get you through Saturday just fine. I have to tell you about one more conversation before Saturday. It's the one that finally made me understand something. Why Gerald Whitcomb had spent 4 years talking about my son's old family money instead of the truth. The Monday after Priya flagged the compliance inquiry, I called Carol and asked her to find out one more thing for me. Not about Marcus, about Gerald. "I want to know how the Whitcomb family's own finances are actually doing," I said. "Publicly available records only. Nothing improper." Carol called back Friday morning. "It took some digging," she said, "but there's a pattern here worth knowing before you walk into that room." Gerald's insurance agency chain, the one that's been in his family 3 generations, lost 2 major underwriting contracts last year. Public filings show the parent company took a real hit. His personal real estate holdings, 3 commercial properties in the Short North District, are carrying significantly more debt than they were 5 years ago. He refinanced twice in the last 18 months. "He's not as solid as he presents himself," I said. "He's not," Carol said, "which may explain something. If Gerald's own liquidity has tightened, a $6 million company marrying into the family starts to look less like a curiosity, more like a resource, especially if that resource is presented to him as already secured. An inheritance Marcus is guaranteed to receive." I sat with that for a long moment. "You're telling me Gerald encouraged Marcus to borrow against my company," I said, "because Gerald himself is quietly short on cash." "I'm telling you it fits the pattern," Carol said carefully. "I can't prove intent, but the timing lines up. Gerald's refinancing troubles started roughly 18 months ago. Marcus's spending against your account started roughly 4 months ago, right after several dinners where Gerald raised the subject of formalizing the succession plan. I thought about every time Gerald had used the word enterprising in that careful, generous tone. I understood, finally, that it had never really been about my age, or my ability to make clear decisions, or even entirely about Marcus. It had been about a man 3 generations deep in inherited money, watching that money quietly run dry, looking around the family table for something solid to lean on, deciding that a black woman's 40 years of labor, dressed up as his son-in-law's eventual inheritance, would do just fine as a life raft, as long as nobody looked too closely at whose hands had actually built it. I didn't share any of this with Marcus. I didn't need to. Some things a person has to arrive at on their own, in a room where the numbers finally speak plainly enough that excuses stop working. The days between that phone call and Saturday passed the way the longest waits always do. Ordinary on the surface, taut underneath. I ran the company, caught 2 more misposted invoices, both honest mistakes, nothing like Marcus's draws. Sat with Lorraine most afternoons, finishing the documentation. Every account, every date, every dollar, organized into a folder Carol would bring to the meeting, though I hoped quietly we wouldn't need more than the first page of it. I saw Elijah and Camille once more in that stretch. Camille had moved from money to fractions, halves and quarters of a pizza, drawn in crayon. She asked me, apropos of nothing, whether half of something big was still bigger than all of something small. Depends what it's made of, I told her. Half of something you built yourself is worth more than all of something somebody just handed you. That's not really math, baby. That's just true. Elijah, on his second visit, told me his father had started sleeping in the guest room some nights, that his parents talked in low voices behind closed doors, that nobody had told him anything directly, but he'd stopped asking because he could tell asking made things worse for everyone. You're a good listener, I told him. One day when you're older, I'll tell you the whole thing, start to finish. You'll understand it was never about you or your sister, not for one single second. Is it about money? He asked. It's about whose name is actually on things, I said, and who's been pretending it says something it doesn't. He didn't ask me to explain further, just nodded, the way a boy nods when he's decided to trust an adult a little longer. Went back inside to find his sister. There's something honest I haven't said yet about those 10 days. There was a night, maybe 4 days before the meeting, when I sat alone in my kitchen with a cup of coffee gone cold in front of me. I let myself feel, fully, for maybe 20 minutes, exactly how much it hurt. My own son had looked at everything Walter and I built, from one van and a folding table, and decided the family that never once got their hands dirty was the family worth impressing. I didn't stay in that feeling long. 20 minutes, maybe less. Then I got up, poured the cold coffee down the sink, went back to the folder Lorraine and I had built. Grief and preparation can occupy the same kitchen table. A woman can hold both at once without either one canceling the other out. Thursday, 2 days before the meeting, Priya called one last time. Halloran's people sent a follow-up, she said. More urgent this time. They want written confirmation of ownership structure by end of week, or they're treating the loan as impaired. Beginning collection proceedings immediately. Tell them, I said, First Merchants will have a complete and accurate answer no later than Monday morning. Should I tell them anything about Saturday? No, I said. Let Saturday happen first. Facts travel faster and cleaner when they're not rushed. I hung up, sat for a moment in my office, looking at the framed photograph on my desk. Walter and me standing in front of the first van, both of us younger than Marcus is now. Both of us grinning like people who had no idea yet how far $80 a month and one folding table would eventually take them. Carol called that same afternoon with the last piece of paperwork, formally prepared now, ready to bring to the meeting. Not just the retitled accounts and the irrevocable trust. A short cover letter, addressed to Halloran Capital Partners and copied to their attorney, stating plainly that Tate Building Services had never had any ownership interest held by Marcus Tate, pledged by him, or available to him, at any point in its history. Any representation otherwise had been made without the company's knowledge or authorization. Once this goes out Monday, Carol said, there's no more ambiguity left for anyone to hide inside. Not for Marcus, not for Halloran, not for Gerald. Send it Monday, I said. Let Saturday be the room where they hear it first, from us, in person, before it becomes a letter with our lawyer's letterhead on it. That night, I sat in my kitchen a while longer than usual. The same kitchen where Walter used to sketch route maps on the backs of old invoices. The same table where I'd once balanced my mother's grocery budget, an 11-year-old girl who didn't yet know that would turn into a life's work. I thought about Camille sorting play money into piles of 5 and 10. I thought about Elijah on the porch, asking if his father was going to be okay. I thought about a 9-year-old boy who already understood something, without anyone explaining a single number to him. That something in his family had come untethered from what was true. I thought, too, about the version of Saturday that was actually mine to choose. Not a performance, not a punishment, just a fact, finally allowed to stand up straight in a room built to make people like me feel small. Friday came, the way Fridays do, ordinary until it isn't. I went to the office at 7, same as always, caught nothing wrong in the ledger, which felt like its own quiet kind of ending. Lorraine and I reviewed the folder Carol would carry into that conference room one final time. Every page in order, nothing left to add. Anything else you need from me before tomorrow? Lorraine asked. Just be near a phone, I said, in case I need to hear a voice that already knows the whole truth. I'll be right here, Lorraine said. Same as I've been the whole time. Saturday morning, I dressed carefully. Not for Gerald Whitcomb, for myself. The charcoal suit I'd worn to close 3 of our biggest commercial contracts. Low heels I could stand in for an hour without flinching. My mother's small gold cross at my throat. I drove the hour into Columbus alone, Walter's letter folded in my handbag, though I still didn't plan to need it. Some things a person carries not because they'll use them, because carrying them steadies the hand. Gerald Whitcomb's downtown office took up the entire top floor of a building with his family's name carved into the lobby stone. 3 generations of Whitcombs looking down from oil portraits. Not one of them, as far as I could tell, ever holding a tool. The conference room had a view of the Scioto River, a table long enough to seat 16. Only 5 of us sat there. Marcus, Renee, Gerald, Carol Delgado, who I'd asked to attend as my counsel, and me. Gerald stood when I walked in. That surprised me. Pulled out my chair. That surprised me more. Vivian, thank you for coming. I know this can feel like a lot at your age, but I think you'll find we only want what's best for the family. Same careful, generous tone from my own dinner table weeks before. I appreciate that, Gerald, I said. Sat down, folded my hands, waited. Marcus started talking almost immediately, the way people do when they've rehearsed something, afraid of losing their nerve if they pause. Succession planning, modernizing the company's governance, bringing in fresh financial thinking, now that the business had grown past what one person could manage alone. He used the word transition 4 times, never once used the word mother as anything but a subject to be managed. I let him finish, let all 4 minutes of it land in the room without interrupting. I've learned, over 61 years, the fastest way to lose an argument Interrupt a man before he's finished proving your point for you. Are you finished? I asked when he stopped. Mom, I just think. Are you finished, Marcus? He stopped. Renee looked at her hands. Gerald's expression flickered, just slightly. The first crack in that careful, generous mask. I don't think Gerald Whitcomb had been spoken to like that, by a woman who looked like me, in a very long time. If ever. I'm finished, Marcus said. Good, I said. Then I'd like to share something too. Carol opened her folder. Before we discuss transition planning further, she said, sliding a single page across the table to Marcus and Gerald both. I want the room to understand the actual legal status of Tate Building Services. As of this past Friday, Marcus reached for the page first. I watched his eyes move down it, quick at first, then slower, then not moving at all, just fixed on one paragraph near the bottom. This says, he said, the trust was restated, irrevocable, corporate trustee. That's correct, Carol said. When? Friday, funded and finalized by close of business. Marcus looked up at me. You didn't tell me you were doing this. You didn't tell me about Russ Halloran, I said. So I suppose we're even, on the subject of things we didn't tell each other. The room went very still. Renee's head turned toward her husband. Slow. The particular slow of a wife hearing a name for the first time in a context she doesn't yet understand. Gerald set his water glass down without drinking from it. Who is Russ Halloran? Renee asked. Marcus didn't answer her, still looking at me. Something in his face had started to come apart. The way a man's face comes apart when he realizes the ground he's been standing on was never actually there. Marcus pledged 40% notional interest in Tate Building Services to a private lender, Carol said. Plainly, the way she says everything, as collateral against a $90,000 bridge loan, taken 4 months ago to cover shortfalls at 2 restaurant locations. The pledge documents represent Marcus as the presumptive successor owner of the company. He has never owned a single share of it. Not then. Not now. That's not, Marcus started. That's not exactly what happened. I was going to. You were going to what? I asked. Pay it back before anyone noticed? With money from a company you don't own? Run by a mother you've spent 4 years telling people built it through. What was the word, Gerald? Enterprising? Gerald's face went the color of old paper. I never meant it as anything but a compliment, he said. You meant it exactly the way it landed, I said, still not raising my voice. I have never needed to raise my voice to be heard clearly. You've spent 4 years wondering out loud whether I understand what my own son married into. I understand precisely what he married into, Gerald. Coal money that became timber money that became insurance money. 3 generations of people who never once had to explain where a dollar actually came from. My money has an explanation for every single cent. 40 years of it. I can walk you through the invoice for the first van, bought in 1994, if you'd like the receipts. Nobody said anything for a moment. Marcus's phone was in his hand now. I noticed. He hadn't lifted it yet. Just holding it. Like a man holding something he hadn't decided whether to use. I want to see the accounts, he said, quieter now. I have signing authority on 2 of them. I can just. You don't, Carol said. Not anymore. The retitling terminated all prior signing authority as of Friday's funding. You'll have received a notice from the trust department at First Merchants. Standard language. Marcus opened his banking app anyway, thumb moving fast. I watched his face while he did it, watched the exact moment the screen loaded. The operating account, the one he'd drawn $22,000 from 3 weeks before, came back with a balance of 0. An access denied banner across the top. He tried the equipment line next. Same result. Then payroll reserve, same result. 3 accounts, 3 zeros, 3 banners in the flattest possible language, telling him he was no longer authorized to view or transact on anything tied to Tate Building Services. This is, Marcus said, and stopped and tried again. You can't just do this. I already did, I said. Friday. Quietly, the way I do most things. Renee had gone very pale beside him, looking between her husband and the phone in his hand, like she was doing arithmetic she didn't want the answer to. Marcus, she said, what does Russ Halloran do if he finds out the shares were never real? Marcus didn't answer her. He looked at his phone, at the 3 zeros glowing back up at him. Then he looked at his father-in-law, the man he'd spent 4 years trying to prove himself worthy of, the man whose approval he'd borrowed his own mother's name to chase. Gerald Whitcomb, for the first time since I'd known him, had absolutely nothing careful or generous left to say. There's one more thing, Carol said. Turn to the final page in her folder, section 14, the Revocation and Successor Clause, as restated Friday. I'll read it exactly as filed. She cleared her throat once. Read it plainly, the way legal language is meant to be read, without performance. The grantor, Vivian Ann Tate, being sole and exclusive owner of all assets herein, retains full and irrevocable authority to designate, exclude, or amend the class of beneficiaries at any time prior to funding. No prior verbal or implied representation by any party shall constitute a claim against trust assets. She set the page down. In plain language, Carol said, nothing Marcus told Russ Halloran was ever legally true, which means the exposure here isn't Vivian's, it's his. Marcus sat very still, the phone finally lowering to the table, his hand shaking slightly. I hadn't seen that since he was a boy, failing a test he'd told everyone he'd studied for. Gerald Whitcomb had come to that room expecting a show. A dignified older black woman, gently managed into irrelevance by men who never had to build anything with their own hands. Instead, he sat across the table and watched the only person in the room who actually owned what she claimed to own. He did not say a single word. I folded my hands on the table, the same way I'd folded them at my own dinner table weeks before. I said the only thing I had come there to say. I don't get loud, I told the room. I get accurate. Then I stood up, thanked Carol, walked out. There was nothing else in that room that belonged to me anymore. I had never once, in 61 years, found a reason to stay past the point where the truth had already finished speaking for itself. I should tell you what happened in the weeks right after that Saturday, before the months started stretching into the longer story I've already told you. The Monday morning after the meeting, before Carol's letter even went out, Marcus showed up at my office unannounced, something he hadn't done in over a year. Lorraine buzzed him through with a look that told me she wasn't sure whether to expect an apology or an argument. It was neither, exactly. He sat across from my desk, the same chair vendor reps sat in when I caught their invoices. He didn't say anything for a long moment. I looked up the filings, he said finally. Gerald's real estate. You were right. 2 of the 3 properties are in serious trouble. I know, I said. Did you know that before Saturday? I did, I said. I didn't bring it up in that room because it wasn't the point. The point was what was true about our company, not what was struggling about his. Marcus nodded slowly, absorbing that the way he'd absorbed most things that week, a little late, a little painfully, but absorbing it all the same. I don't know how to fix what I did, he said. You don't fix it in one conversation, I told him. You fix it the way I built this place, one honest day at a time, for longer than feels fair, until the ledger finally balances on its own. He left that morning without any promises. I didn't ask him for any. Some things a mother has to let a grown son arrive at on his own schedule. not hers. 2 weeks later, Halloran's attorney filed the collection action against Marcus personally, exactly as Carol predicted. I didn't celebrate it. I sat in my office that afternoon and felt something closer to grief than victory. The particular grief of watching a consequence land on someone you love, knowing it was necessary, still wishing, somewhere underneath the necessity, that it hadn't been. Lorraine found me there later, staring at nothing in particular. "You did the right thing," she said, without my having to explain what I was feeling. "I know," I said, knowing that and feeling settled about it aren't always the same morning. "No," Lorraine agreed. "They rarely are." I sat with her a while longer. The two of us, quiet, in an office that had grown from one folding table into something worth $6 million, built by two women who had never once needed anyone's permission to know exactly what they'd earned. There's a part of that first month I haven't mentioned yet. It took me longer to understand its importance than everything else. About 3 weeks after the meeting, Miss Odessa stopped me in the church parking lot again, same as she always does. This time she held onto my arm a little longer than usual. "I heard some of it," she said. "Not all of it." "Enough. Word travels," I said. "It does," Miss Odessa agreed. "Your mother would have been proud, you know, not just of the company, of the way you did it. Quiet, accurate, no shouting in anybody's face. I learned that from her," I said. "Same as I learned everything else that mattered." Miss Odessa nodded slowly. "There's a version of this story," she said, "where you humiliate that man in front of his own family, drag it out, make him beg. Some folks would have. Some folks think that's what justice is supposed to look like. It never interested me," I said. "I didn't need him to beg. I needed the truth to be undeniable. Those aren't the same thing. Only one of them actually lasts." She squeezed my arm once and let me go, the way she'd done since I was a girl, standing beside my mother in that same parking lot. I drove home that Sunday, thinking about how much of what I'd built, the company, the trust, the whole architecture of that Saturday, had really just been an extension of a lesson. A lesson my mother taught me decades before any of it existed. Accuracy outlasts anger, every single time. A month after the meeting, Carol called with an update I hadn't expected. Halloran's attorney reached out informally, she said. "Not about Marcus, about you." Apparently, Preston Alt wanted to know, off the record, whether Tate Building Services would ever consider extending credit to small businesses directly, the way Halloran's firm does, but without the predatory structure. Quoting him loosely, in 30 years of collection work, he'd never seen a company's paperwork this clean. I sat with that a moment, turning it over. "Tell him I'll think about it," I said. "Not because of Marcus. Because 32 years ago, nobody would lend me and Walter a dime for that first van. We had to save the whole $1,800 ourselves, in cash, from bookkeeping clients and janitorial routes, before any bank would even look at us. If there's a way to be the door that never opened for us, I'd like to understand what that could look like." Carol said she'd set up an exploratory conversation. It's still ongoing. Slow, careful. The way most good things I've built have always been. 6 weeks after the meeting, Renee brought the children to Sunday dinner at my house for the first time since everything happened. Without Marcus. Though not, she was careful to tell me, because she was keeping them from him. "He asked if he could come next time," she said, setting a dish on my counter. The same counter Walter and I installed ourselves, the summer after we paid off the house. "I told him that's between him and you now, not me." "That's fair," I said. Elijah found me in the kitchen, while Camille chased the neighbor's cat around the yard outside. "Dad's looking for a new job," he said, "a real one, not the restaurant." "I heard," I said. "Is that good?" he asked, watching my face carefully. the way he always did when he wasn't sure which answer he was supposed to want. It's a start, I told him. Whether it becomes good depends on what he does with it. Same as it's always been. For anybody. He seemed satisfied with that. More satisfied than he'd looked in weeks. Went outside to help his sister corner the cat. I stood in my kitchen a moment, listening to my grandchildren laugh in a yard my husband and I had planted grass in ourselves. One bag of seed at a time, back when Marcus was still small enough to ride on Walter's shoulders while he worked. 2 months after the meeting, I finally drove out to see the Tate Building Services crew at one of our largest commercial sites, a regional distribution center on the edge of Logan County, our contract for 11 years running. The crew supervisor, a woman named Denise who'd worked for us over a decade, met me in the parking lot with a clipboard and a grin. "Heard you had quite a month, boss," Denise said. "You heard right," I said. "Good," Denise said. "Some of these office types forget who actually built the ladder they're standing on. Glad somebody reminded them." I laughed at that. Actually laughed. First time in what felt like weeks. Standing in a parking lot with a woman who'd scrubbed floors and buffed tile alongside me more mornings than I could count. Two black women who understood, without needing to explain it to each other, exactly what it costs to build something nobody hands you. And exactly what it's worth. Once it's finally, unmistakably, yours. One more thing happened that first year. It says something about how far the ripple traveled. Denise, the crew supervisor, asked me once, not long after that Saturday, whether I'd ever thought about starting something for young women coming up the way I had. No college fund behind them, no family cushion, just a strong back and a habit of showing up early. I told her I'd think about it. I did more than think. By spring, Tate Building Services had a small apprenticeship program running out of that same low office on the edge of Bellefontaine. 4 young women that first year, 2 of them black, 1 Latina, 1 a white girl from a trailer park outside Rush, Sylvania, whose mother had cleaned houses alongside mine decades before. I taught them the ledger the way Walter and I learned it, slow, by hand, line by line, no shortcuts. Shortcuts are how a person ends up not understanding their own numbers when somebody else tries to explain those numbers back to them. One of the 4, a 19-year-old named Destiny, reminded me so much of myself at that age. I caught myself staring at her sometimes, mid-sentence, the way you stare at an old photograph that suddenly moves. "Miss Vivian," she asked me one afternoon, "did you always know you'd own something this big?" "No," I told her. "I knew I'd never let anybody else decide what I was worth." The size came later. The knowing came first. She wrote that down in a little notebook she carried, the way Camille carries her green ledger book. I thought, watching her do it, that maybe this was the real inheritance all along. Not the company, not the house, the knowing. Gerald Whitcomb's granddaughter started at the same elementary school as Elijah and Camille that fall. Renee mentioned once, carefully, that the whole extended Whitcomb family had gone quiet on the subject of old family money altogether, as though the phrase itself had become something nobody wanted to be caught still believing in. I didn't need that quiet as proof of anything. I already knew what was true before anyone else in that family did. But I won't pretend it didn't feel like something, hearing it secondhand. On an ordinary Tuesday, folding laundry in a house I'd paid for with my own 2 hands, 32 years running. There's one final piece I want to leave you with. Something small, easy to miss. But it's the part I think about most now. More than the conference room, more than the 3 zeros on Marcus's phone screen. A few weeks after that first Sunday dinner back at my house, Camille asked me, out of nowhere, while she was practicing her addition at my kitchen table, whether Grandpa Gerald was a bad man. I thought about that question carefully. 6-year-olds deserve honest answers given with care, not simplified ones given carelessly. No, baby, I said. I don't think he's a bad man. I think he's a man who was taught, a long time ago, that some kinds of money matter more than others. It took him a long time, maybe his whole life, to learn any different. Some people never do learn it. That doesn't make them evil. It just makes them smaller than they could have been. Is our money the good kind? She asked. Our money, I told her, has your grandfather's handwriting in a letter I still keep in my desk. My mother's voice in my ear every single morning I go to work. 32 years of your grandmother's own two hands behind every single dollar of it. I don't know if that makes it the good kind. I know it makes it the true kind. And true has always mattered more to me than good, baby. True is what you can build on. She nodded, satisfied. The way children are satisfied by answers that feel solid, even when they don't fully understand every word yet. Went back to her column of numbers. I sat there watching her work, thinking about a folding table in a kitchen 40 years gone. A woman at that table who never once imagined the granddaughter she'd someday have, or the ledger book with the green cover that granddaughter would carry everywhere she went, calling it, with total seriousness, her business book. I want to close with one more thing. Something that happened almost a year after that Saturday. It's the piece that finally let me stop turning the whole story over in my mind every night before sleep. Marcus called on a Tuesday evening, his voice steadier than I'd heard it in longer than I could remember. I paid off the last of the Halloran settlement today, he said. Every dollar. It took me 11 months, but it's done. How does it feel? I asked. The same question I'd asked him once before, about a $40 billing error at a job he'd taken to survive the wreckage of his own choices. Like the first thing I've actually finished in years, he said. Not borrowed, not inherited, finished. I told him I was proud of him. This time the pride didn't come tangled up with grief, the way it had the first few times. It came clean, the way pride is supposed to feel when it's actually earned by the person you're feeling it about. Can I ask you something? He said. Always. Why didn't you just cut me off completely? After everything, you would have been within your rights. I thought about that question for a moment, the way I think about most things that matter, slowly, out loud, letting the answer arrive at its own pace instead of rushing it. Because your father built a clause that could only ever be undone by me, I said. I think some part of him knew, even writing it, that the point was never punishment. The point was protection. Protecting what we built, yes, but also protecting you from a version of yourself that could borrow against a lie and call it inheritance. Cutting you off completely would have protected the company. It wouldn't have protected you. Marcus was quiet on the line a moment. I used to think, he said, that the company was the thing you cared about most. More than me sometimes. I see now that was never true. You just refused to let me confuse the two. Your father used to say the house stays in the name that earns it, I told him. I think what he really meant, underneath all of it, was that a person stays whole in the name that earns their own life. Not the one somebody hands you, not the one you borrow to impress people who were never going to respect you for it anyway. The one you build yourself, brick by brick, dollar by dollar, invoice by invoice, until it's unmistakably, undeniably yours. He didn't say anything for a long moment. Then quietly, I'd like to come to dinner Sunday, if that's still all right. It's always been all right, I told him. I was just waiting for you to be ready to sit at that table as the man your father and I actually raised. Instead of the one Gerald Whitcomb spent 4 years teaching you to be ashamed of becoming. Sunday came. Marcus sat at my table, The same table where he'd once leaned back in the good chair and told me to stop wasting his inheritance on myself. This time, he cleared the plates himself, without being asked. Camille climbed into his lap afterward with her green ledger book, showed him how she'd learned to add a column of numbers. Elijah watched his father's face while he did it, the way a boy watches to see if something he's been hoping for is finally, actually real. It was real, slow, imperfect, still carrying the weight of everything it cost to get there. But real. Carol called me Monday morning, right on schedule. The letter went out to Halloran Capital Partners and Preston Alt at 9 sharp, she said. Plain language. Tate Building Services has never had any ownership interest held by, pledged by, or available to Marcus Tate at any point in its history. How fast will they move? Fast, Carol said. A lender like Halloran doesn't wait around once the collateral behind a loan turns out to be fiction. My guess is he calls the loan by end of week, refers the account straight to Preston Alt for collection against Marcus personally. There's no company asset left to attach. By Wednesday, Carol's guess proved right. Marcus called me that evening, his voice smaller than I'd heard it in years. Halloran's attorney sent a formal demand, he said. $90,000 plus fees, due in 30 days. Or they're filing suit against me directly, not the company. Me. I'm sorry that's happening to you, I told him, and I meant it. Loving someone and letting the consequences of their own choices finally reach them are not opposites. They're both part of the same thing. Can you help me? He asked. I already did, I said. I told you the truth, out loud, in a kitchen, before Saturday ever happened. I gave you the chance to tell Halloran's people yourself before they found out on their own. You didn't take it. That was your choice to make, Marcus. Same as it was your choice to pledge shares that were never yours in the first place. He didn't argue with me. I think by then he'd run out of rooms where arguing still worked. The restaurant closed within 6 weeks. Both locations. Quietly. The way businesses close when the person running them has spent more energy managing appearances than managing the books. Marcus sold his car, a lease he'd upgraded the same month he first drew against the equipment line. Moved into a smaller apartment with Renee and the children. A 2-bedroom on the north side of Columbus that Renee found and signed for entirely in her own name. Gerald Whitcomb's situation unraveled on its own timeline, separate from mine, though I heard about it the way small towns and small legal circles always eventually let news travel. One of his refinanced Short North properties went into foreclosure that spring. His insurance agency, the 3-generation chain that had always talked about how the money should be kept rather than made, lost a 3rd major underwriting contract. This one reported in the Columbus business papers. His name attached in a way that finally couldn't be spun as anything other than what it was. I never gloated about any of it. I didn't call Renee to ask for updates. She called me on her own every few weeks, mostly to talk about the children. Occasionally to mention, in passing, that her father had grown noticeably quieter at family gatherings, less inclined to use words like enterprising about anyone at all. Renee filed for divorce from Marcus 8 months after that Saturday. Not because of the money, she told me plainly. Watching him try to manufacture an inheritance, instead of simply asking his own mother for help, had shown her something about him, something she couldn't unsee. She kept the children in Bellefontaine, closer to me, closer to Mount Olive, closer to a grandmother who had never once, through any of it, stopped showing up to Elijah's assemblies or Camille's math homework. Gerald Whitcomb and I have spoken exactly twice since that conference room, both times briefly, both times at family events involving the children. both times with a careful, quieter tone than the one he used to reach for so easily. He has never apologized directly. I have never asked him to. Some men only ever learn the true weight of a thing by watching it get taken away from someone they assumed would never notice. Lorraine still keeps the books, 19 years running now, 20 as of this spring. We caught a misposted invoice together just last month, $4.80. She looked at me over her reading glasses and said, "Some things never change." We both laughed, because some things shouldn't. Camille turned 7 not long ago. For her birthday, I gave her a small ledger book, the kind with a green cover and ruled columns. I taught her how to add a column of numbers the way my mother taught me, the way I once taught myself at a kitchen table in a house 2 blocks from the one I live in now. She takes it everywhere, calls it her business book. Elijah, 10 now, asked me recently whether I was ever scared. That Saturday, walking into Gerald's office, I told him the truth. "A little," I said, "but being a little scared and being wrong are not the same thing." I knew exactly what was true. Being scared just meant I understood how much it mattered. I still go through the ledger every morning, 7 days a week, same as I always have. I still drive past the corner shop on Main Street. A few months back, the young clerk finally stopped asking if I'm there about a cleaning job. Started asking instead how business has been at Tate Building Services. Word travels, eventually, even in a town that doesn't slow down for much. Some evenings I still sit at Walter's grave beneath the oak tree and tell him how it all played out, in full, the way I promised I would. "You were right," I told him, not long ago. "The house stays in the name that earns it." Turns out that was never just about the house. I didn't take anything from my son. I just stopped holding it up. This morning, in my kitchen on North Detroit Street, I propped Walter's letter against the sugar bowl and poured 1 cup of coffee.